Naram namaskritam naram chaiva narottamam devim sarasatim vyasam tito jayodiraya nashtapriyashu bhadresu nityam bhagavata seva bhagavati uttamashoki bhaktir bhavati naishtaki nigama kaparuragaritam param shukam makaramita dravi samvitam pibata bhagatam rasamaryam mahora horisika bhuva bhagaham Krishna sadam bhagate yamagini karona sadrishamasha paranako dinodidaham Tamapi adabhishuddha vishuddham vibhusam happyarena vinambiriksaram prakyayidam maranam sanklesha nirvana musanti nanyataham Chakvisharanam charanam bhushamaram bhajana bhakvatani hachakavabaruna kavartatam bhajatam shadamataham Om Agana Timaranda Shangana Gana Saraka Chaksurin Miritam Yana Tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manavabhishtam Ishtapitam Yana Bhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyataparakamanam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sta Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Daganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Sabrutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Sha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabanu Jagapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kantanamoshram Jayadam Sarudo Pango Mama Madhya Madhya Matsarvashaparam Bhoja Radha Maranamo Sriman Rasa Rasa Rabhi Vamsi Vata Karsan Pinayashan Upaka Gopanatasriyasanam Divyad Bindaranya Kampadrumada Srimad Radhagara Shima Shanishto Sri Sri Radha Shira Govina Prestadavihi Seva Manush Marami Namo Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Shami Tanam Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesa Sanyavani Praskita Desarai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sati Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Good morning, Rob, on Zoom and on Facebook Live. John Malik. Good morning. By Bobby, Govinda Dev. Thus far, we had a wonderful weekend. Prem Purushottam, formerly known as Bhakti Peter, an actor, Krishna conscious actor, a Vaikuntha player, par excellence, was visiting us and did a drama both Saturday night in Salt Lake City and the same drama again last night here in Spanish Fork, just a 15-minute one-man drama called The Enchanted Pool of Death. It's an episode from the Mahabharata involving a conversation between Yudhisthira, and it turned out that it was his father disguised as a crane in the midst of a pool of water. Yudhisthira's four brothers had come to the lake being very thirsty to drink, and they were challenged by this crane in the lake to answer his questions before they drank, but their thirst overwhelmed them, and they brushed aside the order of the crane and drank. As soon as their lips touched the water, they fell down dead, one after another. And when Yudhisthira arrived, he saw his four brothers dead or unconscious, and he also was thirsty. But before he drank, again, the question rang out, before you drink, answer my riddles. And Yudhisthira, being a philosophically inclined person, in spite of his thirst, in spite of the grief, which he surely felt, seeing the dead bodies of his four beloved brothers, he rose to the challenge and agreed to answer the questions of Yamaraj, the crane, who turned out later to be Yamaraj's father, putting him through some sort of a test. He answered the question successfully. Yamaraj blessed him to achieve victory in the coming Kurukshetra war and brought his four brothers back to life. It was a very nice rendition. We extended the normal feast program by 15 minutes to accommodate this skit. Everybody appreciated it. Everybody liked it. And we give our thanks to Bhakti Peter, who's now en route back to Saranagati in British Columbia, where he and his good wife reside. When we left off last Wednesday, we did so by narrating the story of Sukanya. Sukanya was the daughter of Swayambhu Mano. She defended the sage Chayavana to neutralize the curse that Chayavana unleashed. The king offered his daughter to Chayavana. He was old, he was crotchety, he was mean to her. But eventually he regained his youth, grace of the twin Ashvins, two demigods. And there's an incident where in order to get Chayavana's youth back, the twin Ashvins escort him, one on either side, into a lake, and they all come out. The twin Ashvins are already beautiful, effulgent, young. But the purpose of escorting Chayavana into the lake was to make him beautiful and young too. Now, the twin Ashvins had an agenda of their own, and that was they aspired to marry Sukanya because of her beauty and good qualities. And so while they're in the lake, they switched positions, and all three emerged from the lake looking identical. She could not initially tell the difference between her husband, who had been transformed, and the twin Ashvins, who were long-lived and blessed and effulgent demigods. But she noticed one difference between them, two differences actually. The main difference was that two of the effulgent personalities who emerged from the lake did not blink, and the third one blinked. In addition to that, she noticed that the garland on one of them starting to fade, whereas the garland on the other two wasn't fading. So she was able to identify which of the three were her husband. And again, her sterling character asserted itself. She chose her husband, who would not have been as long-lived, and in fact, who had treated her badly up to this point. She nevertheless asserted her integrity by choosing her husband. She discarded the opportunity to upgrade, to get a demigod as a husband instead of a mere mortal. But this idea of the demigods being unblinking is one of the many descriptions of the demigods who sport in the Trikuta mountain, where Gajendra went with his wives to also recreate. We have elaborate descriptions of an environment within this material world itself. This is not the spiritual world. We've been talking for at least 15 sessions about the heavenly planet within this material world, as narrated by Sukadeva Goswami. Now, it's interesting because when you hear descriptions, even of this material world, narrated by a pure devotee of Krishna, the descriptions of the material world awaken your Krishna consciousness. That's the effect of hearing from pure devotees of Krishna. Everywhere they see Krishna. Premanjana Churita Bhakti Badochana, Santa Siddhaiva Dayashu, Yam Shayam Ashandan Rachinta Gurupam, Govindamari Purusham Tamaham Vajami. When one has eyes anointed with the salve of love, when one is served and cultivated loving devotional service to Krishna, and one sees Krishna with eyes of love, such as Sukadeva Goswami, Shayambhu Narashada Komara Kaparam Shambhu, Pradara Janaka Bisham Bhadavyasaki Vaya. There are 12 Mahajans, all of whom have perfect vision of Lord Krishna and who are capable of guiding our footsteps, lighting our footsteps back to home, back to God. They are once having seen Krishna, Santa Sadhaiva Hridayashu, because you actually see Krishna with your heart. You don't see him with ordinary eyes of flesh and bone. You see Krishna when your heart becomes full of light. Krishna is within the heart. And by dint of devotional service, all dirty things within the heart are removed, and one sees Krishna in one's heart of heart. And having seen Krishna, you never, ever after that do not see Krishna. You don't not see Krishna. Two negatives make a positive, which means you're always seeing Krishna from that moment on. So even when someone like Sukadeva Goswami, a pure devotee of Lord, he's describing this material world. He's not describing the spiritual world. Yet it makes us think constantly of Krishna, constantly of the spiritual world. Just like sometimes you look at the moon, it's hard to gauge depth perception. It's hard to understand how far away from the earth the moon actually is. But it says when you look at something distant through the branches of a nearby tree, then you get better perspective. You get better depth perspective. So when you look at this material world through the eyes of a purified devotee of the Lord, such as Sukadeva Goswami, you don't see the material world, you see Krishna. What's one of the most captivating phenomena within this material world? Would you agree with me that there's nothing cuter than a baby crawling around, googling and goggling, attempting to say its first words, daddy, mommy? The whole world is enchanted by newborn babies and their antics, how silly they are, and how loving they are, and how trusting they are. Just pulls you in. So when materialists hear the descriptions, or when materialists write a book, or as an academic, they comment on the babyhood of Krishna. Krishna's pastimes have been popular for thousands and thousands of years. And so many people know that if they were to write their own book, no one would read it. So they comment, they write on Krishna's coattails, and they write commentaries, particularly on the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which describes Krishna's personal pastimes. Materialists without any background of devotional service or even any foundation of particular belief in a personality of Godhead, for their own name and fame and recognition, they dare to write commentaries on Krishna's transcendental pastimes. So when people read those commentaries, when unfortunately being misled, they read the commentaries on Krishna by materialists, they're reminded of babies crawling in this material world. Even though the subject matter is the supreme transcendental personality of Godhead, it brings them back down to this material world of earth, air, fire, and water. Janma karma medivam evam yoviti chakvam deho punarjanmaneti. The result of hearing about Krishna should be that one's sojourn in this material world comes to an end. It's terminated. Birth, death, disease, and old age roll to a screeching halt. And by hearing about Krishna from the authorized sources, we understand that this will be the very last lifetime of the spirit soul incarcerated in the material body. Unfortunately, when you hear from unauthorized sources, you hear about the birth and activities of Krishna, but from a person who doesn't understand the dimension of transcendence. All it does is remind you of babies crawling around in this material world. And what do we say? We're saying that when a devotee sees a baby crawling around, and then it's perfectly fine, there's nothing wrong with being enamored with babies. It certainly is enchanting. And when devotees see babies crawling around, exhibiting their cuteness, they immediately think of Krishna. They immediately think of Krishna. Flip that, and when you hear of Krishna, the supremely transcendent personality of Godhead, the result of hearing should be to become immortal, but you hear from the wrong source. You hear from materialists, then all you think of is things in this material world. So that's the difference between hearing from an authorized source and hearing from an authorized source. The unauthorized source can take transcendence and make it mundane. The authorized source can take mundane and make it transcendent. Someone said, matter's a dictionary to spirit. It's material world. Adashakam says in the Bhagavad Gita, this whole material world is like the perverted reflection of the spiritual world. It's like an upside down banyan tree, which you only find as a reflection in a body of water. This material world is, someone said, matter is a dictionary of spirit. If we're in Krishna consciousness, if we're aware of a supreme personality of Godhead, who is the source and origin of everything, then we don't see anything in this material world as being separated from him. We see everything as belonging to, being owned by, and pervaded and supported by the Lord and his Paramatma feature. Excuse me, I'm just going to turn off this heater. It's making a little bit of a distracting noise. Thanks for your patience there. So Sukadeva Goswami is described, among other things, the sages at Naimisharanya. And the reason I bring this up is because we just talked about one feature of the demigods as being unblinking. Now, Naimisharanya is a gathering place since time immemorial where devotees have come to perform sacrifices and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Naimisharanya is considered a hub of the universe. Very, very important, concentrated vortex of spirituality. But the word Naimi, from which we get Naimisharanya, means one who doesn't blink. Sutta Goswami came from hearing transcendental descriptions of the Lord from Sukadeva Goswami. He arrived amongst the sages in Naimishrana headed by Sanaka Rishi, who were engaged in performing a 1,000-year sacrifice. No one blinking. No one blinking. That means they had some characteristics in common with the demigods. We heard previously a description of the demigods, the Vidyadharas, the Apsaras, the Gandharvas, some of whom sing beautifully, some of whom dance beautifully, some of whom beautifully chant the Vedic hymns. We heard about how their bodies are fragrant, how they enter into waters that are fragrant, how when the fragrant demigods enter into the fragrant waters, they make the waters even more fragrant. How when the fragrant waters host the fragrant demigods amongst their waters, they make the demigods more fragrant. And Prabhupada says of all of this, Prabhupada sums all these descriptions up by saying, since the bodies of demigoddess are so well formed, we can only imagine how well formed the bodies of the Vaikuntha damsels. Now, if it were anyone else other than a pure devotee commenting on these descriptions, their tongue would be hanging out. They would be hankering. The descriptions are so compelling that, yes, I've got to go there. It's called the flowery words of the Vedas. Examples given, you look at the ocean, you're a thirsty man, you look at the ocean and you think, wow, if I could just drink that water, if I could swim in that water, if I could bathe in that water, if I could wash my clothes in that water, if I could cook in that water, all my problems would be solved. Because the ocean looks like the solution to what ails you. If you're dying of thirst, if you're dehydrated, if your tongue is black and big in your mouth, you look at the ocean, you think, I've arrived at the solution to all my problems. It looks good, doesn't it? It looks wet. Looks like it can quench your thirst, fill your pores back up with hydration. But looks can be deceiving. The ocean cannot do anything for the thirsty man. If it can do anything to make things even worse, you could even imagine it. Why? Because although it looks good, it's salty. You can't drink salty water. You can't cure your dehydration by bathing or showering or wallowing in salty water. This material world is like the ocean. It looks good. It looks good. How could it not look good? It's a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. Of course it looks good. It comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is Madan Mohan Mahini, the all-attractive. So why wouldn't that which emanates from the all-attractive have its own quality of attractiveness? The problem is, cannot give us the happiness that we're looking for. Cannot give us the happiness we're looking for. Bhagavatam elsewhere gives a description of a thirsty man trekking through the desert just about the end of his strength. And he sees what looks like water shimmering in the distance. Cool, clear water is the subject of one cowboy song. Cool, clear water. He's a devil, not a man, and he spreads the burning sands with cool, clear water. Yeah, it's not a function of spiritual consciousness to muck around in this material world looking for happiness. If you look for happiness in the material world, it's like looking for water in the desert. If you see water in the desert, you should be educated, well-informed enough to know that's a mirage. It's a deluding potency. Many animals, in chasing after the mirage of water in the desert, lost their lives. They never arrived at the edge of the lake because the lake was itself a phantasmagoria. Seeking for happiness in this material world is a useless endeavor. A materialist can read about Krishna and that'll automatic, and they'll think about this material world. They'll go back, they'll revert to the material world in which their hopes reside for happiness, for satisfaction, for resolution. On the other hand, a Krishna conscious person can describe this material world, and the result of that is not that one wants to advance or improve one's situation in the material world. Sharga loka vishante tsinye punya marta loka vishanim evam tvayi dharma manu papanam gatakadamsam. The information we get from Krishna through the chain of pure devotees is that you can go to the heavenly planets. You can live for 100,000 years. You can have a body with garlanded with flowers, which are imperishable, which never fade. You can be unblinking. You can have youth. Moreover, the demigods, it's described that they're pretty much born full grown. They don't have any of the pangs of teenage or pimples or any of the frustrations and agony of growing up and changing your body rapidly. Neither do they have a period of invalidity. They don't have any rest homes. They don't have any memory clinics in the heavenly planets. Your old age period is quickly done with. In the material, in this level, we can be, in an old age home for as much as 20, 30 years. I remember visiting my mother during her last years in a rest home, they call it euphemistically, in Pennsylvania. And as I was visiting with my mother in her room, there was this annoying, persistent kind of moan coming from down the hall. Oh, oh, oh. You could tell that the person who was emitting this moan was extremely unhappy and miserable. So I asked one of the nurses about this lady's history. She was 95. She'd been in the nursing home since she was 75. She'd been there for 20 years. No wonder she's going, oh, who of us wouldn't be going, oh, just praying for death, praying for an end to it. But the demigods, they don't have extended, prolonged periods of invalidity. They come almost fully formed after birth, and they go very quickly. So there's very little disease, very little old age, and there are very few pangs of birth. And from someone on our level, on our platform, hearing this, it's easy to be enamored. Oh yeah, I want that. I want that. From our platform, it seems like the demigods are almost immortal, almost free of misery. But we get the information from pure devotees. Don't go there. Don't bend your mind in that way. Don't settle for anything less than life in the spiritual world with an eternal body, totally free from birth, death, disease, and old age. So Prabhupada, in all of this descriptions, as a summation, Prabhupada, the pure devotee, says these words: since the bodies of demigods and demigoddesses are so well formed, we can only imagine how well formed are the bodies of the Vaikuntha planets. See that? Immediately, from the description of the material world, immediately goes to the spiritual world. In the third canto, during the conversation, I don't know whether this is Prithu Maharaj or Kapila, I'm not sure which one. Yat Sankaram Hare Pananti Matadashir Vaidura Marakata Hemura Yeshambariat Katita Tashmita Marakrishnatmanam Narasha Mayaram. Again, going to the Vaikuntha world and imagining, as Prabhupada encourages us to do, the inhabitants of the Vaikuntha world, each one is in a Satchidananda body, an eternal liberated body. They're finished with any infatuation of this material world. They're back there for good. No one who ever went to the spiritual world ever came back to this material world missing it or wanting to turn back the clock or relive the good old days. No, there's no such thing as good old days in the material world once you've achieved liberation. Well, the inhabitants of Vaikuntha, according to this verse from the third canto, are traveling in their airplanes to some function. Their airplanes, their aerial chariots are made of lapis lazuli, emeralds, and gold. It says that the men are movie star handsome, the women are movie star beautiful. Take the most beautiful men and women who star in the silver screen and multiply their beauty unlimitedly, and you get the beauty of the inhabitants of the spiritual world, their husbands, their wives. They have houses, they have vehicles, they have transportation. Everything that's in this material world is there in the spiritual world, but it's eternal. It's real. It's not a perverted reflection. It's substance and not shadow. Anyway, these beautiful men and women, unimaginably beautiful, are crowded together in these little small compact aerial chariots. And there's a potential for eroticism. There's a potential for arousing lusty desires because the men are rubbing against the beautiful hips and waists and breasts of the women and vice versa. And in this material world, that is a sure formula for arousal, as a sure formula for the awakening of lusting to desire. And yet it says, neither the men nor the women in this close proximity of each other's beautiful bodies, millions of times more beautiful than the bodies, the unblinking bodies of the demigoddesses, they cannot be stimulated to be passion by their mirth and beautiful charms. They're speaking very cleverly. They're joking. They're doing everything that lusty boys and girls in this material world do. And yet they're not stimulated to passion, because Krishna himself, if the demigoddesses are that much better than we are, if the Vaikuntha Basis, the inhabitants of Vaikuntha, are so much better than the demigods, imagine the form of the Lord to which all the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are attracted, so much so that they're not attracted by each other's bodies. They have no attraction one for the other, because their minds are all reaching and stretching to Krishna. Imagine the form of Krishna. Not surprisingly, Akrura, and we quoted this verse last week, Yatrad Bhatani Sarvani Bhuma Vyati Vajale Trambishvataro Brahm Kim Medrishtam Adbuham. When Akrura sees Krishna, as he's chauffeuring Krishna back to Mathura, he says to Krishna, he declares in absolute awe and astonishment, he says, Yatrad Bhutani Sarvani, Lord, seeing you, I am seeing everything. There's nothing I'm not seeing. There's nothing which has not had its origin in you. And it's a logical principle that something which creates something else, the created entity, cannot have more qualities than the creation. The creation always has to have more qualities than the emanation, than the result of it. The sun is always going to be hotter than the sunshine, isn't it? The sun is going to be millions and millions of times hotter than the sun. If it's warm here, 93 million miles away from the sun on an August day, it's not logical to think that it's going to be cold on the surface of the sun. Just the opposite. If the sun is the origin of heat, if you can get a sunburn 90 million miles away by going out with your shirt off for an hour on an August day, then it must be so much hotter in the sun. So whatever we see in this material world, yad yad vibhuti matsat srimad ordam tajadeva mamatej amsa samvitam, is simply a shadow, a hint. Whatever there is in this material world has no substance in and of itself. Its only purpose is to remind us of the unlimited qualities of Krishna. That's it. So pure devotees are the ones who are actually seeing substance and not shadow. They're seeing reality and not illusion. And when Makura's eyes, anointed with the salve of love, blessed by the Lord, gaze upon the transcendental form of Krishna, he says, now that I'm seeing you, O Supreme Absolute Truth, in whom reside all amazing things on the earth. Whatever there is amazing within the three worlds is contained, multiplied many times over in the body of Krishna, in whom reside all amazing things on the earth and sky and the water. What amazing things could I see in this world? That's what we're describing today. Once you see Krishna, you see him from thence evermore. And when you look at the phenomenal elements of this material world, you don't see things in terms of their separate existence from Krishna. You see everything as part and parcel of Krishna. You see Krishna as a super soul within every living being. You see Krishna as a Paramatma within the atom. You see everything is belonging to Krishna. After Krishna had left Vrindavan, gone to Mathura, had been gone for some time, Mother Yashoda, every once in a while, as mothers do, would wander into his room, being lonely, missing her son. And she would see his staff that he used to take when going out and herding, and she would be stunned in ecstasy. She would just stay there in the doorway for maybe a day of Brahma. We don't know. 4,300,000 years, just being stunned at his staff. And then she would snap out of that trance after millions and millions of years by our calculation. And then her eyes would some or other fall on his buffalo horn, which we used to tuck in his belt and blow. And then again, another day of Brahma, or 2 days of Brahma. What to speak of when she would come and her eyes would fall on the shelf where his flutes were. I don't think Krishna took his flutes to Dwarka. It appears that he left his flutes along with his childhood behind when he assumed the adult responsibility of keeping the world safe from the burdensome military forces which are overwhelming the earth. We don't hear anything about him playing flute in Dwarka or playing flute in Kurukshetra. So let's imagine Mother Yashoda's eyes falling on the shelf where he keeps his various lengths and tuned flutes. And there she just, that's it. She did, days and days and days of Brahma. So even aside from seeing Krishna as the super soul with everyone's heart within the atom, he's the owner. He owns everything. A Krishna conscious person does not see France, Britain, Italy, Sicily, Tunisia, Morocco. Krishna conscious person sees this is Krishna. Krishna is everything is created by Krishna. Everything is owned by Krishna. Everything is meant for Krishna's enjoyment. See, when Prabhupada came to America, he was well aware of the crowded conditions in India, of the deprivation of big masses of people who didn't have even enough resources for drinking water and adequate food. Prabhupada would fly across vast prairies in Nebraska and Iowa, and he would remark, and also in Africa, same thing. He would say that there is so much land, it's not being used. Some parts of the world, people are overcrowded. There's not enough to go around for everyone to have a basic standard of living. And then in other parts of the world, people are living crammed into cities, an opulent, lavish lifestyle of sense gratification. He said, if we saw everything as one land and all living beings as all children of God, then we would bring about the equal distribution of land. There wouldn't be this disparity of the crowded conditions of Calcutta and then vast, desolate places in Africa and America where you won't see any living beings for hundreds and hundreds of miles, or Australia is another example. I remember once we drove from Melbourne to Perth, Budi Manta and I. Took us 3 days. We only saw, I think, one Aborigine standing alongside of the road trying to sell boomerangs in that whole time. The Prabhupada thought if we actually were Krishna conscious, we wouldn't see everything in terms of France, Italy, Morocco, Tunisia, Iraq, Iran, Serbia, Croatia, Pakistan, India, Russia, Ukraine. It would solve all the problems. It would resolve all the friction and all the wars, all the violence. If we just learn the art of recognizing our source, our creator, and our well-wishing friend, centering our lives on Krishna. This is what the demigods do. This is how they became demigods. Tashmin tushtikim aprapam jagadim lokashapari haritim balameshwara. There's nothing one cannot achieve by worshiping Vishnu. He's the source of everything. There are no hankerings left over. It's not that when you worship Vishnu, then you have to take time off or divert yourself to satisfy peripheral or subsidiary or ancillary hankerings. When you worship Vishnu, you satisfy all desires. You satisfy desires that you didn't even know you had. You fulfill the wildest dreams beyond your furthest imagination. And so it's no wonder that great mystics like Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and Indra worship Krishna, or worship Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune who bestows opulences on their devotees. And then thousands and thousands of Lakshmis worship Krishna. Then Krishna himself worships Srimati Radharani. We read in the 8th canto about the churning of the ocean of milk, and various auspicious items were produced. Dhanvantari was produced, the elephant on which Indra arrived was produced, the horse, a very auspicious horse, Ujjasrava, was produced. Healing herbs were produced, so many things. But the greatest of all productions from the ocean was Lakshmi. Lakshmi was produced, churned up from the ocean. She was so beautiful, so full of opulence, so full of dazzling splendor, that all the demons and demigods aspired to have her choose them as their husband. They thought that if I could have Lakshmi as my wife, my life would be over and above. And as is the custom, the eligible young princess would look over all of the aspiring suitors and make a choice. She could ask them questions about their pedigree, their upbringing. She could feel their muscles. She could look at their teeth, whatever, like testing a car. She had every right to examine any prospective future husband in any way that she would like. And so Lakshmi cast her glance over all the hankering, lusting, tongue out demigods and demons. And it says, Evam Mirashi Sadguna Varam Nijakashayatasharam Babevaram Sharvagana Peksharam Rama Makundam Nirapekshid Meshitam. Millions and millions of demigods, they worship Lakshmi in order to maintain their positions of influence and universal responsibility. And yet millions and millions of Lakshmis worship Krishna. Why? As Lakshmi looked over the demigods, she saw only one that was detached. She saw only one that was not hankering after being her husband. She saw only one that fully embodied the concept of independence and self-sufficiency. Someone who is a world in and of himself. And she recognized that in every case amongst the demigods and demons, each one felt themselves incomplete. They wanted Lakshmi to choose them. They wanted to be the husband of the goddess of fortune in the vain desire to complete themselves, thinking in a misdirected way that if I could just have this one thing, or marry this one girl, or have this amount of money in the bank, then my incompleteness would be resolved. I would feel complete. But no one can achieve completeness by connecting with any of the other subsidiary creations of the Lord. We are all dependent. We're all subordinate. We're all parts. And the only way that the part can feel completeness is connecting with the whole. There's no way one demigod or one demigoddess or one demon or one demoness or one demigod and one demoness or one demon or one demigoddess could ever be complete by connecting one with another. Prabhupada gave the example, 0 plus 0 is 0, plus another 0, 0, 5 zeros are 0, 10 zeros are 0, 99 zeros are 0, a million zeros are still 0. You need the one. As soon as the one is there, 1 0 becomes 10, 2 zeros become 100, 3 zeros, and so on and so forth. So Krishna is that one that fills the God-sized hole in each and every one of his life and makes us complete. And Lakshmi, to her credit, she recognized that. She did not, as an incomplete, want to look to another incomplete for the satisfaction of her innermost desires. She looked up and down the line of aspiring, hankering, drooling suitors. She picked the only one that wasn't aspiring, that wasn't hankering, that wasn't drooling, that was completely composed and serene in and of himself. And Rama Mukundam, what does it say? Rama Mukundam nirapeksham ipsitam. She recognized that in Vishnu or in Krishna, there is full self-sufficiency, that they're all desirable qualities. There's nothing manifest in the created world which is not there originally in Krishna. Having said that, I think it's a good point to stop for today. We've covered the first 19 chapters, 19 verses of the second chapter of the Bhagavatam. We've heard about the descriptions of the demigods, the descriptions of the water, the descriptions of the mountain, the descriptions of the other animals that reside in this heavenly planet, the descriptions of the flowers and the plants and the creepers. And even though we have not, Sukadeva Goswami as the narrator has not directly said anything really about the world beyond the heavenly planets, still all of that being narrated and purported to us by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, reminds us, every bit of it reminds us and increases our hankering to go beyond the temporary planets of the demigods, to look beyond the flowery words of the Vedas to the real world, the substantial world, the world that's ever existing, eternal, the world which is our home from which we exited our mistake. We want to rectify that mistake and resituate ourselves back to home, back in the spiritual world, sheltered at the lotus feet of Krishna. Om Tat Sat. Tomorrow, we'll begin with the appearance of Gajendra into this environment amongst the mountains and the waters and the trees and the plants and the insects and the other animals and demigods, the king of elephants, who himself is like a mountain of power and influence and composure and self-entitlement. He makes his grand entrance along with his many wives and his many children. And it is going to be worth coming back and joining us tomorrow morning for Transcendental Tuesday. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. A little dry. Thank you, Bhai Bobby, my better half, for joining. John Malik, Govinda Dev, thank you and good morning. Carmen, Hare Krishna, all glories to Prabhupada. Sid Block, I haven't seen your name in the Facebook comments for a while, but nice you could come back and be with us on this Motivational Monday. Michelle, thank you very kindly, Michelle, for joining us. Then Sundari Priya, please accept my humble obeisances. Scrolling down here, Brent Spencer. Okay, here's one of Carmen's very sophisticated rhymes. I'm going to read it very slowly because these bear thought. These cannot be taken off. They cannot be recited briskly or lightly. Here we go. For jivas to rise to heavenly highs, they hear from sources authorized, but stories from mouths unauthorized can only surmise lies and failed tries. For jivas to rise to heavenly highs, they hear from sources authorized, but stories from mouths unauthorized can only surmise lies and failed tries. Good job. That's up to your usual high standard of sophistication, Karma. Thank you for that. And last but not least, Chad, who's been a regular recently. Thank you, Chad. Hare Krishna. Rob, our poet laureate, our official wordsmith. What have you got for us today?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I think I'm just the quipper. Carmen is the poet for sure.
Well, she does one every time, and you do 5 or 6. So there's, you each have your strong points.
Yes, I'm okay with that. Hers, I think, take far more thought and intelligence to be able to put together.
Yeah, you dive into them, and you swim around in there and you find newer and newer nuances. But yours are hard hitting and straightforward. I love them as well.
Oh, thank you, Prabhuji. All right. What's the cutest thing you could ever see? Lord Krishna as a little blue baby. Hearing from the wrong source to become immortal is just another human foible.
Uh, uh.
You're out of luck if you seek joy in the muck.
Looking in the wrong place, looking for the right thing in the wrong place.
Like water in the desert is only an illusion, material satisfaction is just a distraction that causes confusion.
Very nice. That was the essence of what we were saying today.
If you think this life has beauty unfurled, then Vaikuntha will rock your world.
Oh, I love that one. Man, that's very, very, very pointed.
The only way to fill the hole is to turn to Krishna in full, and he will make us whole.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
Hare Krishna.
Well, thank you. Those are first class. So nice to end our exposition, our discussion with this kind of poetry and verse by not one but two of our listeners. You complete us. You complete us because your verses are about Krishna, and without Krishna we can never achieve that state of fullness after which we aspire. So thank you all for partnering with us on these Motivational Mondays, Transcendental Tuesdays, and Wisdom Wednesdays. We'll be back tomorrow for more of the same. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.